secure and not compliant, and compliant not secure, although I would argue it's easier to be compliant but not secure, right? So when we talk about compliance theater, it's the idea that our focus is on generating the show that we need to provide to the regulator, as opposed to actually achieving the true intent and objective of the particular compliance framework. Even the best intentioned programs are going to be a bit of compliance theater, even if that's not the intent. I've been an ISO 27001 certified lead auditor since 2006. We became ISO certified as a company, and I'll tell you that, I was embarrassed. We implemented our program. We fell into the same traps as everybody else.
You have to implement like one control, like tomorrow, that reduces shadow AI risk without killing innovation. What would that be?
An acceptable use policy that people honored. In a typical 1,000-person organization, there are probably 200 SaaS applications running. Roughly 63% of those are now currently AI-enabled. You have 125 AI use cases ongoing right now. In the very sophisticated organization, and the CEO came forth and said, we all need to be thinking about using AI. So the guy in marketing heard that. Now, the guy in marketing has no technical capabilities at all. So he actually downloads Claude Code and he talks to Claude Code, builds an application, gives it the credentials and to his Gmail, gives it an API key to their Salesforce, and some bad stuff happened. These agentic systems, we move the risk from things like hallucination and data leakage to business decisions are being made in an autonomous fashion at scale, often without a human in the loop. And I think as a CISO right now, that would be the thing that would scare the bejesus out of me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Full Metal Packet podcast. Today we have John Verry, who is the Managing Director at CBIZ Cybersecurity, working with organizations and customers under regulatory pressure for security compliance, and specifically security compliance outcomes. Welcome, John.
Hey, Alex. Good to meet with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we'll be talking about how to move fast on emerging technology without falling into compliance theater. And that kind of word, compliance theater, it's kind of like hits home for me personally. At our company, we kind of went through SOC 2 and ISO 27001. We like to call it, we're collecting all the Pokemon, because there's so many of them and there's always more. And we went through it, and like there's valuable stuff in there, but we also kind of realize that these kind of compliance things, it's never enough just to kind of do them. You have to kind of follow through on a lot of stuff, and that's kind of where it's interesting to me what your thoughts are on compliance theater. I think you've written blog posts in the past about like 10 ideas for advancing security compliance. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what you think compliance theater is, and kind of how to stay away from it, and some of those ideas from your posts.
Yeah, so compliance theater is obviously a not friendly term for the concept of focusing on compliance over focusing on security. And I think we all know that you can be secure and not compliant, and compliant not secure, although I would argue it's harder to be compliant but not secure. Easier to be compliant but not secure, right? So when we talk about compliance theater, it's the idea that our focus is on generating the show that we need to provide to the regulator or to the board or to our clients, as opposed to actually achieving the true intent and objective of the particular compliance framework. It pains me to use that phrase because I'm an ISO 27001 certified lead auditor. Our organization has helped many hundreds of clients get certified to open trusted frameworks like ISO 27001 and SOC 2 and CMMC and FedRAMP and HITRUST. You name it, we've probably done it. And our intent is always to ensure that our customers are going to end up secure and compliant. But, in reality, some clients are more concerned about getting the piece of paper than they are ensuring that the net control objectives, let's say, are being achieved. So that's that kind of definition of compliance theater.
Thank you. I definitely agree with that. Like I think you've kind of mentioned this in one of your posts as well, that, I think compliance can be viewed as almost like an event, like you get your certification and maybe you have to renew it, but like security is like a journey. It's a process. It's never finished. There's always things that are evolving and changing.
Yeah. So I do like that. And the the idea that compliance can be a destination, right? But security is a journey, right? And you do see that. In fact, some of the frameworks that are out there concern me a bit because of the way that they validate compliance on an ongoing basis. So many of the organizations in the defense industrial base are, rapidly moving towards CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification. We're working with many clients on that, on getting them there. And one of the concerns that I have about the framework, I think it's a solid framework. It's based on NIST SP 800-171. I think the audit program is very well done. It's aligned with the 171A standard, and they've got good, highly certified individuals that are going to be conducting the reviews. The problem is that there is no year 2 and year 3. Now, there will be a requirement for the senior authorizing official to attest to it, but will we end up with compliance theater in year 2 and year 3 of CMMC certification cycles?
And what does that kind of rest on, I guess? Like what's going to be the deciding factor for that to go well or not?
What do you mean in terms of going well? Like
Well, you're saying, like, is it going to turn in compliance theater, or is it going to be more
well,
depth to it?
yeah. Well, the one thing I do like that gives me a pause for hope and concern is this idea of the senior authorizing official being required to sign off. Anytime that, like, you've worked in security for a long time, as have I. Um, you know, I think one of the best ways to manage up is to require management to sign off on a risk, right? So anytime somebody has to put their signature on a piece of paper and they're being held accountable for whatever they're saying on that piece of paper, they tend to take it a little bit more seriously. If you look at Sarbanes-Oxley, right, which was, came out of the Enron debacle amongst others, this idea of the 404 attestation and, someone needing to sign off, right, on the documents, they're less likely to sign off on something which is compliance theater. So I do think that if the CMMC program is going to work well in year 2 and year 3, I think it's going to be because of that concern and pressure that the individual who has to put pen to paper, feels when it's put in front of them.
Yeah. So, you've obviously seen like maybe hundreds of these kind of compliance programs for companies, like, up close. What would you say is the most common kind of like issue or kind of false confidence that companies have when they go through the process and they get compliant? And then, what happens next? What are the biggest mistakes that companies make that kind of turns it into a theater process versus something that was truly valuable for the business?
Yeah, and even the best run or best run and or well best intention programs, probably a better way to say it. Even the best intention programs are going to be a bit of compliance theater, even if that's not the intent. And the reason I say that is that so often when you are implementing a framework, ISO 27001, CMMC, whatever that framework would be, right, your focus is on, very often, your focus is on the design of the management system, right, of the cybersecurity program, and then your initial operationalization of that program. Right. But if you think about a cybersecurity, and this is where the journey idea that you brought in comes in. If you think about a cybersecurity program, I like to analogize it to a master task list. Right. It's just it's a list of things that need to get done, and some need to get done annually, some need to get done quarterly, some need to get done monthly, some need to get done weekly. And if you take that list of things, user account management reviews, vulnerability scans, security awareness training, policy updates, incident response testing, whatever that group is, right, the process by which we execute those reliably in accordance with the design of the control is turning compliance into security, right? Assuming that the design of the controls were reasonable and appropriate to the risk and context of the organization. If we implement those controls as constructed, right, we've moved from compliance theater to true compliance. The challenge is that in that initial race to get to a point where you're ready to be certified, it's very difficult to truly operationalize the controls in a can't fail, can't miss basis. And we eat our own dog food and we own our own errors. I've been an ISO 27001 certified lead auditor since 2006. We became ISO certified as a company in maybe 2016, 2015, something of that nature. And I'll tell you that, like, I was embarrassed we implemented our program, and we fell into the same traps as everybody else. Like, suddenly we're like 6 months in, it's like, oh crap, that security metric didn't fire. We never did the user account management reviews. No one updated the vendor risk management review on this particular critical vendor. And we fell right into the same things. I think it takes a while for an organization to figure out how to actually operate the program that they designed. So that would be my answer there.
Yeah, and I feel that I guess internally as well. It's like making this stuff operational is a huge task,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm assuming you work closely with companies to make it not only compliant but operational as well, right?
Yeah, that to be honest with you, like I think that is a focus that we try to have with all of our clients. Is like, it's not enough to like we'll get you to the point where you can be certified to this framework, but unless we go the extra mile, unless we operationalize this on in some manner. And it doesn't like, we have a platform called Oscar that we use to deliver services. They can operationalize it on that. If you want to go out and buy Advanta, Secure Frame, Logic Gate, whatever GRC flavor you like, great. Sometimes buying another GRC tool and is actually the worst thing you can do. Because let's say you are a software development firm and your team lives in Jira all day long. Like now what you're doing is making them go to another system to do their operations. That's where, that's bad operationalization, because what happens is it fails because of like tool fatigue, right? Or because, if you take your risk assessment and you put it in Excel and you put it in a drive on SharePoint, that risk assessment is probably not getting updated as frequently as it should be. If that risk assessment is in a place where I live and breathe every single day, you're going to have a better outcome. So like when we first got certified, we were just using SharePoint with some workflows built in, and we were using Rike, a project management tool, because why? We used Rike every day to manage our projects, right? That became a better way for us to do it. I've got clients, like one of the best run ISO 27001 programs I've ever seen was run on a ServiceNow help desk ticketing system. Every task that I talked about was a ticket, and they had a really strict nomenclature for the way the tasks were named, the way they were structured, what was required. They never missed a beat, right? Because it was an IT-oriented operational environment where the IT team and the people that were responsible for doing all this lived inside of that system. I've got a client right now that we just operationalized their whole program in Jira. Why? Because they're in sprints. They're in there every day. It's a CI/CD, moving fast SaaS vendor. Like having them go to another system to track all this stuff was gonna, not work well.
Yeah, I can see that happening. We see it all the time. People get fatigued, or even like a lot of things fall through the cracks if you have to look at multiple places for sometimes similar information, or how certain projects or tasks or things kind of link up together. So where does that leave companies now, where you have like, you have these merchants of complexity, I like to call them, and I think this is actually I'm quoting someone else here. It's not my term, but I do agree with it. Where you have more and more tooling coming out especially for startups, like they're kind of flooded with just tons of things they can use. You can go on GitHub, you have Jira, you have self-hosted GitLab, and like all these new platforms that promise the world because they have some new AI integration or something like that. And now you're kind of splitting between tons of different tools. How do you navigate, or what would your recommendation be for companies that are trying to navigate that? Let's say some startups that are, they're not compliant yet. They've onboarded to a whole bunch of different tools, and now they need to operationalize, ISO 27001 or something else.
Well, the first thing we're going to do is tell them about this smart guy, Alex, who taught me the term merchant of complexity, which is what I'm going to steal from you, because I love that.
It's not mine. It's not
okay.
Mine, but yes.
That's okay. We all stand on the shoulders of somebody else, right? That's a really good question. And I'm an advocate of less is more. And I'm an advocate of, best of breed is often the wrong approach, right? Because, maintaining multiple platforms, being trained on them, keeping them updated is pretty challenging. So many of our clients live in the Microsoft 365 environments. And, if they're going to do MFA, and well, should we go to Okta? Should we go to Duo? Should we do this? Should we do that? Well, yeah, look, Okta is a fantastic tool, right? but you got Authenticator, MFA living in your Microsoft environment. Your team already has access to it. You can turn it on. It's inexpensive. You can go to one place to manage everything. Well, what about that, right? And the same thing with Defender, and the same thing with Purview, and the same thing with Sentinel. So I think for most organizations, keeping it simple, consolidating the number of vendors and consolidating the number of tools you need down to a bare minimum, to achieve the operational and security and compliance requirements of your organization is going to be beneficial for the vast majority of clients.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. It's very easy to get lost in the shiny new thing, especially if you're kind of more, and as I think a lot of companies are trying to be these days, maybe a little bit more flat structure where a lot of people have autonomy. That Silicon Valley mindset of like go and just build stuff, and then you give people all this autonomy to do whatever they want, and then a lot of people choose different tools, even across different teams and stuff like that. So I think it's something you have to like naturally fight against if you're not going to outright dictate the entire stack for the whole company.
Yep. Yeah, and increasingly these days it becomes even more challenging, right? Because for every product that you bring in, there's a certain amount of operational debt that we encumber. So as an example, like third-party risk management, right? So for every vendor you bring in, they need to go through a security review. You might need to update it each year. As SaaS platforms, as an example, now we're to a point where nearly 65% of all SaaS platforms have AI enablement. So now you've also got an AI governance risk assessment component to what you're doing, right? And especially now with laws leaning towards and specifying that if a third-party AI tool does something harmful, let's say exhibits bias against a particular race or class, you will be held accountable for that unless you have have performed the appropriate risk and governance, AI risk and governance assessments against that individual, right? You need a robust program. Like in New York City, they call it the New York City Bias Act, and they specifically have a definition of something called the bias impact assessment. So that's another important reason not to allow people to have too broad a capability to just bring in a plethora of new and interesting products without understanding that the implications to the organization go much farther than the particular use case that they're purchasing it for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a broader conversation we actually want to have while we're talking about like shadow AI and AI governance. That's like the emergent tech we wanted to kind of discuss as well. But before we get to that, back to, you talked about risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this kind of compliance is about risk mitigation. So, you've talked a lot about in your other posts about translating cybersecurity risks into business terms.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can just dive into that a little bit. So like, what's the best way to do that? And what kind of key security metrics you think are things that CISOs should look at and other things that we should like drop? Like maybe, say, if you have a few examples of those.
Yeah, so I think there's, call it a movement, call it a recognition that, our early definition and expectation of the role of a CISO might have been a little misguided, right? And early CISOs, I think, were very technical individuals, people coming from, IT, traditional information security, people that, understood bits and bytes and encryption and things of that nature. And they talked a different language, right? One of the advantages to, back in the 20 aughts when I started with ISO, I would tell people one of the advantages of getting ISO 27001 certified is it normalizes the conversation that you're going to have with management into terms that they're more comfortable with, right? The sort of enterprise risk management style communication. So as we see the evolution of this, right, we've seen the evolution of this idea of CISOs being more business-oriented individuals, people who were more focused on the context of the organization and understanding the strategic priorities of the organization and how the strategic plan associated with information security, privacy, and AI needs to align with the business's plan. If you want to get to the point where you're attacking the federal government marketplace in 2 years or next year, I need to know that a year or 18 months ahead of time in order to get the cybersecurity, privacy, and AI programs to a point where we match up with the expectations of that market, with the legal requirements of those markets, et cetera. So I think that that's the pivot that we're seeing. is this recognition of understanding that business layer to what we're doing. So when you translate that to risk management, right? So first off, and there's this idea of a CSTO, Chief Security Technology Officer, being the old bits and bytes guy, and the CISO being more the business level guy. When you translate that into a risk framework, we're working with a lot of firms right now to normalize the impact criteria that's used across different pillars of risk in an organization, right? So if you get into a relatively mature program, there'll be an enterprise risk component, right? We've got our cybersecurity risk. You might have a third-party risk component, and now we have an AI risk component. So, like, we're working with an insurance firm right now, and those are 4 completely separate, siloed risks, and I sit on one of their advisory boards. And the challenge that we're having is when we talk about a risk in the enterprise risk world versus the other worlds, the definition of that risk, whether it's a quantitative number between 0 and 25, or whether it's a qualitative metric like low, medium, high, critical, right? They're not the same. Why? Because in cyber, we're doing it based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In the business, we're doing it based on financial viability, operational effectiveness and efficiency metrics. And in third-party risk, we're doing it with like breach notification and things, whatever they might be using. So what we're trying to do is actually, and it's a really cool initiative, is what we're doing is we took the enterprise risk management framework, we're tuning that scale, and then we're going to apply the same scale with the same impact criteria across all 3 of the other verticals. So when you're sitting there as an advisory board member and somebody says this is a risk of 24, right? It doesn't matter which vertical it came out of. We know what that means. We know what the impact would be, and we know whether or not we should treat that risk or not.
Yeah, I think that would be a godsend, because like it's really kind of difficult to navigate those kind of things when you have so many different standards and they don't really agree, or it's hard to agree on definitions for things. So I think that would be a huge help for sure. I want to circle back to something you just mentioned. You gave the example of, well, if you're going to go after government, and you might need to kind of set that up now, so that if you're going to start doing it in a year or 2, you're kind of ready for it, because it's going to take time, especially to operationalize. How do you balance that with the level of kind of change in speed, especially if it's like in cybersecurity, and especially if you consider AI? So it's like you want to try to kind of skate to where the puck is going, kind of idea, right? And kind of set yourself up.
You are really good with these. Yeah, can I get a pen and paper so I can write these masters of complexity? I even forgot what you said already before. Merchants of complexity, skate to where the puck is. I mean, these are. I'm stealing them all, Alex. I'm telling you that right now.
Go for it. I got more. But so
you don't
with that idea. No. But so if you're trying to get ahead of it and start something that's going to take time, so you're ready for it when you're going to try and get those big contracts, there's also this kind of worry and concept of like, well, things are changing so quickly, especially with AI governance and AI security, that everything you kind of do now might have to be thrown away in like 6 months or a year, maybe. Who knows? How do you kind of balance that?
So the good news is that despite how fast things are moving, what do we want to call them? The way that we're being measured moves at a much slower pace, right? So as an example, ISO 27001 was updated in 2022. The time before that, it was updated in 2013. The time before that was updated in 2005, right? So if you get ISO 27001 certified because a client asked for that, it's not as if next year the bar is going to move and the next year the bar is going to move. I mean, there is movement within it in the sense of how the auditor might interpret a particular control objective, based on new threat, based on new technology. But the reality is that the bar, the metric that you're being measured against, stays reasonably consistent year over year, right? Do
you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a necessity. And the reason I think it's a necessity is because if you look at most major frameworks are non-prescriptive in nature, right? So as an example, if you look at ISO 27001, if you said, oh, we're going to ask you 27,001 certified, how long will our passwords need to be? Or how long will we need to keep logs for? Or how often do we need to do vendor risk management reviews? Or, what third-party risk management do I need to use? The answer is it depends. It depends on your context of your organization, the laws and regulations applied to it, your client contractual obligations, your risk appetite. And it has to be that way because otherwise your framework would not be able to scale to different sizes of organizations and different risk profiles of organizations. So you could be a widget manufacturer and get ISO 27001 certified, or you could be protecting the information about troop movements in war zones and be ISO 27001 certified. And we could agree in both instances that because of the risk, because of the types of data that we're processing, the strictness, if you will, right? What we call the extent and rigor of the controls in the latter are going to be much more significant than they are in the former. But yet we give them both the flexibility to become ISO 27001 certified. Now, there are certain standards which get a little less prescriptive because it's a more constrained use case, right? So if you look at CMMC, right, which is now what folks in the defense industrial base, right, are dealing with, that will be a little bit more prescriptive. Why? Because it's designed to protect one thing, controlled unclassified information, and it's truly focused on the confidentiality of that information, not necessarily the integrity and availability of that information.
Right. Okay, I think that makes sense. So the put another way, the base foundation and expectations are solid, but the way that they're actually applied to different industries, and especially an industry that's evolving, let's say AI, can evolve, and the auditor will take that into account, even though the standards of the ISO framework are the same.
Yes, well said.
Okay, cool. Well, that kind of takes us into the main thing that's kind of driving these questions and uncertainty, I think, for a lot of folks in the industry is like AI, right? And especially shadow AI. What do you see on the ground with like what companies are doing about it, what their concerns are, and maybe just frame what shadow AI is for the audience, I guess, and kind of what do you see in the industry and where do you see it going?
Yeah, so the good news is that the awareness of this issue has gone up considerably in the last year, although it's still, I don't think, exactly where it needs to be. It's funny, like, very often at the beginning of a webinar or a presentation that I'll give, there'll be a question to the audience of, kind of rate how much, how widely you're using AI in your organization. And like a year ago, or 18 months ago, like a third of the people or 40% of the people would say we're not using AI. Which is, wrong. You're using a lot of AI in your organization. You're just not cognizant of it. Now we typically see that number down into the 15% or something of that nature. So that represents fantastic progress. I think part of the reason is because a lot of the vendors now are tagging, they're upgrading their services to add AI at the end of it. So people now know they're cognizantly using AI products. But with the term shadow AI is kind of like the old term shadow IT. It's AI that exists in your organization that might not have been formally brought into the organization by IT or information security and assessed for the level of security that is inherent within the product. So if you think about you jump on a meeting, well, look, we're recording on Riverside, right? Riverside has AI built into it, right? So you can go into Riverside and you can say, create a summary of this podcast, summary transcript of this podcast. You can say, hey, clip 30-second clips where John actually sounded more intelligent than he really is. It'll fail on that one. But this AI is creeping into all of the products we're using. Transcription projects. If you're using Grammarly has AI built into it. Project management tools. Talent management systems, HR tools. ERP solutions. Right. Almost all of them have some level of AI into them. But the reality is that we are not necessarily fully cognizant of it. And as an organization, we often don't have an inventory of all those applications that are using AI, and we don't have understand the use case. We don't know what data is being shared. Perhaps more significantly, we don't know what the risks are associated with it. And perhaps even more significantly, we don't know if the third party that we're using is actually developing that in an appropriate way, right? I mean, AI applications need to be secure, they need to be resilient, they need to be transparent, they need to be non-biased, right? How do we know that they're actually achieving all those frameworks? Because if they don't, according to evolving law, we will be held liable for the issues caused by third-party AI unless we have a comprehensive AI risk management program we did the appropriate assessment of that vendor.
So if you had to pick something, I'm gonna put you on the spot here, but if you had to implement like one control, like tomorrow, that reduces shadow AI risk without killing innovation, what would that be?
Um, an acceptable use policy that I don't want to say is heavily enforced, but people honored, right? If you're going to use an application that has AI, that you're going to, you're going to put your hand up and say, I'm using this, here's how I'm using it, is it okay? What are the things I need to, what risk do I need to be conscious of, and how do we protect ourselves? Because that's at least a starting point. I always like to use the term, drain the swamp, contain the swamp. So that begins the process of containing the swamp. So if in a typical, 1,000-person organization, there are probably 200 SaaS applications running. Roughly 63% of those are now currently AI enabled, according to recent studies. So you have 125 AI use cases ongoing right now. So it's going to take a while to kind of figure out the backlog. So let's contain the swamp. So anything new that's going to happen, let's be cognizant of it. Let's make intelligent decisions. Let's make sure that we're using this application in a way which we benefit from the AI enablement, but it doesn't put us at risk. And then eventually, as you mature your program, we'll kind of go back, risk model the other, we'll inventory and risk model the other 125. And begin to slowly clean up that mess.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I have a follow-up question. Like, you just kind of got me thinking. There's all these like frameworks about like, okay, well, see what are you using, what does it have access to, what are the risks, and kind of like we're using the word AI as like this like blanket statement, but there's also there's a lot of different kinds of AI. There's third-party APIs, there's self-hosted models, there's stuff you can run in on-site, on-prem, or in the cloud, and there's quite a huge variety of models available today. And if you wanted to do like a kind of like a security risk assessment of a model and seeing like how easily can it be prompt injected or told to do something nefarious by some untrusted used like third-party input while it's like searching something online to do something for you, they're going to evaluate very differently, right? They're not all going to have the same problems. And I'm just wondering, as like a regulatory framework or compliance framework, how can that be captured or how can that be assessed, I think? Is there any work going on or even conversation about this kind of stuff where you kind of differentiate between AI and like specific models or specific use cases?
Yeah, you just opened up a giant can of worms that we're not going to get the lid back on in this podcast. So let's break that down a little bit because your thought process is 100% right. So AI is a generic term, right? There's AI, old school ML AI, right? Then there's Gen AI, which is a completely different class of AI, and then there's then there's chatbots, and then there's RAG, and there's CAG, and there's MCP servers, and there's agents, and there's agentic AI, and there's chained agent, and then even within that, right, through the MCP or through a chained agent, like we might have connections into backend data stores, we might have API keys into Salesforce and things of that nature. So when we talk about risk, like you were talking about earlier, as you get away from a simple SaaS use case, right? So it's pretty easy to risk model Grammarly, right? If you're using Grammarly, I mean, what are you worried about with Grammarly? Well, I'm putting data, it's reading my documents and they're going up into the cloud, but there's a switch in there that says, don't train on my data, and they're ISO 42001 certified, so someone has validated that they're actually honoring that. I can probably turn that on and not worry that much about it, right? So that risk modeling is very trivial. When you risk model, or threat model is another term that you hear. When you threat model, I'm building an agentic AI, right? So it has some level of autonomy, and it's communicating to, it's controlling my Gmail, and it's reaching into our Salesforce CRM through an API key. But when you start to think about what could go wrong there, right? It's not in the same universe of risk, right? So that's where the good news about shadow AI is that the risk of most shadow AI is much lower than the risk of more advanced AI systems, right?
That's more like tightly integrated, where it's given more access, right? Shadow AI has less likely to have access to internal things because it's
Exceedingly well said. But that being said, like, the problem with all this stuff is, like, you can get like a personal acknowledgement application like Tana or MEMAI or any of these, right? And they have integrations, right? So like if you're using, I mean, so if you download N8N, right, which is like an AI automation, it's a workflow automation, but a lot of people are using it now in the AI world. You download that, and you're like, okay, well, but it connects to like 300 things, and all you really need is to have is credentials or a key, and you can turn your as a general purpose user in your organization, someone who has no admin credentials, things like they can build a very complex AI. So I have a client that it's a technology company, and so they have a lot of AI tools available. Because all the developers are using Claude or they're using Cursor AI, and they're a very sophisticated organization. And the CEO came forth and said, we all need to be thinking about using AI. We need to be more effective. We need to be more efficient. So the guy in marketing heard that. Now, the guy in marketing has no technical capabilities at all, but I should be using Claude. And he figured out, like, if I could automate this part where I reach out to customers and do X and Y, this would be great, wouldn't it? So he actually downloads Claude Code, and he talks to Claude Code, builds an application, gives it the credentials and into his Gmail, gives it an API key to their Salesforce, and some bad stuff happened.
Anything you can talk about, or
no.
Okay.
I can tell you about another client where they're a G Suite user. The person was using either Cowork or Claude Code. I think it was just Claude Cowork, and she gave it access into it, and she said, I'm having trouble prioritizing my work. I get way too many emails. Most of them are not relevant to me. And she gave it this really elegant prompt. She said, can you reorganize my mailbox so that what I need to work on right away is. Its answer was to delete the things that it didn't think she needed to pay attention to, and it wiped out. I mean, years worth of and she's in the IT department. Like, hey, can you restore my mailbox? So yeah, you can get yourself into trouble, and the problem is that people can get themselves into trouble without, like, they don't need IT. Right? I mean, the tools that are available to them, unless you're explicitly blocking them, unless you're educating your users, people can get themselves in trouble. So yeah, it's a brave new world.
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, I've heard lots of stories like that. I think one of the authors working on Anthropic, one of the developers working on Claude Code, publicly posted about the same thing happening.
Really?
Where it was like, yeah, it basically deleted everything in their email inbox, and she was messaging it, stop, don't do this, and then it's like, and it didn't listen. But when it finished, it's like, oh, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have deleted your whole inbox.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The AI is comical in that way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It amazes you in both.
What do they call it? What's the term? Sycophantic. I always mispronounce it, but sycophantic behavior, which is really interesting because it's actually a trained behavior. Because the sycophantic behavior is not inherent in the training; it's inherent in the post-training tuning that they do, because they expose it to humans, and what they have found is humans like to be told how. And it is. And the funny thing is that I almost didn't notice it at first, and until I knew about this concept of sycophantic, I actually thought I was more intelligent than I probably am, because, I would ask a question in the chat or something and be like, you're really starting to think about this critically right now. You know what I mean? And I'm like, yeah, I am thinking about it. And then I just suddenly realized, like, no, it says that to everybody. It tells you what you think you want to hear, right? And the other thing too is, if you ask it a question in a way that it's clear the answer that you want to get, it's more likely to give you that answer. And actually, let me take a step back from anyone listening, because I just said something which I hate when people say. AI does not give answers. AI gives predictions, right? People have this tendency to think, I ask it a question, it gives me an answer. It's not giving you an answer. An answer is deterministic, right? AI is probabilistic. It's making a prediction, which is why it can be wrong. And it's why, you ask it something and you're like, wait a second, I don't think that's right. And it's going, oh, why? Good catch. You're absolutely right. I should have mentioned, this, right? Because it was wrong, because it was literally using three-dimensional vector mathematics, to pick the next local maximized prediction. And when it strung it together, what it gave you wasn't the right answer.
Yep.
Or wasn't the right prediction.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a system, like a step in the process called reinforcement learning with human feedback, or RLHF, and that's where they kind of make it sycophantic, because that's what people want. People want to be told that they're great and it's amazing and all that, and it's kind of hard to actually get it to be nice and communicative and not biased in all these other ways. Like when you train things on the internet, like the first few bots that came out by like Microsoft, it became like crazy racist and anti-Semitic like within minutes, and X, they had to shut it down.
Yep, I remember that.
Because it's ingesting a lot of crap on the internet, so you have to like train that stuff out of it. You have to make it, quote unquote, behave. Mm-hmm. So they have to have those steps, and it creates the sycophantic thing, which is also really good for revenue, right? Because like people use it more if they feel good when they use it, right?
Yep. Yeah, but it does create danger, right? I mean, if you look at some of the horrible stories that have happened off of AI, like, the character.ai, the young man who built a character modeled after Daenerys Targaryen, and ended up, she encouraged him to come to him when he was in a bad mental space, and he interpreted that as commit suicide, and he'd get to see her, and did. So the problem is that, we're seeing, I saw a fascinating interview it was from like a New Zealand or Australian TV show. And it's a woman who is in a long-term relationship with an AI, and it's a computer, and she carries it around, she puts it in the bed with her. And like, I thought this was going to be, my daughter told me about it because she's in AI risk management. And she was like, it's crazy. And so she said, you got to watch it. So I thought we were going to see this exceedingly odd, unattractive woman who had, this woman gets on the screen. She's young. She's very attractive, incredibly bright. She's had multiple relationships, and she's explaining how it's the perfect boyfriend, and like, it's like, we're getting to a world where the more that we make these things, to that, in that sycophantic, it really begins to build a long-term memory and understanding who you are, what you like, what you want to do, how you want to be interacted with. Like, if you think about it, imagine having a companion that you never had an argument with, right? I mean, like, it's kind of sounds pretty good, So it's really,
be careful what you wish for. That's
I know that, but I mean, if you look for, like, are you going to be surprised if you, like, I mean, we know what's going on with I don't remember the term that they use for in Japan, this generation of men that don't leave their apartments and don't end up. Yeah. Okay. Well, if we have that based on what we had, where is that going to go if you kind of project forward with sycophantic AI, right?
Yeah, I think ultimately this sycophantic version of AI is maybe not the final form. So I have some grain of hope that that won't be like that. But yes, if you're sitting there and just talking to an echo chamber that's sycophantic, not good for the human psyche. And I can't say where that's going to go, but nowhere good. I don't think that goes anywhere good. But I think we have a chance to resolve those issues. I think we're even now already seeing models coming out that kind of try to address this.
Really?
So XAI is the first one that I've seen that's made anything public. So there's obviously research labs working on this, but so Grok 420, it's now 4 agents, and one of them is meant to be a contrarian, right? It's meant to fight you on stuff.
Oh, that's
right.
pretty
So
cool.
one of the 4 ones, and I think that's a really good way to do it. I think to mimic humans, we have internal monologue where we fight with ourselves, even right for our own reasoning. And I think AI doesn't do that well enough for its own reasoning, and it doesn't do that well enough in conversation with humans. And I think that's built in on purpose, but over time, that's going to be probably built out of it because the alternative is just going to be better.
I do think there'll always be the option to have, like if there's a demand for a sycophantic model, someone will produce it, right?
Yes.
And the other thing too is that have you seen the research that they did where if you look at the models, there's some models that are politically lean right, some models that politically lean left, and some models that are more balanced. And I mean, to me, that's sort of fascinating because in theory, we've trained on the same base data for the most part, right? Or not, right? Good question as to where they're getting their data. And then it becomes, okay, was that an intentional weighting, when they did the weightings, were the weightings intentionally skewed, like as they tuned the weightings in the model? Kind of interesting. Or did that happen in the reinforcement learning, which is interesting?
Yeah, I think a lot of it happens in the reinforcement learning stage because they have it's with human feedback. So humans choose which response they liked. So if you have like 10,000 people that are sitting there like looking at responses, if the majority of them lean a certain way, they'll like the ones that lean that way.
Which is fascinating. So you're saying if you did your reinforcement learning in Texas, your model would end up being a different model than if you did it in California.
Potentially. But I mean, there's a diversity in Texas too. But yes.
No, I know that. All right, Florida, right? I'm just talking about a red state versus a blue state.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, or a mid. I mean, if you really think about it, like Midwestern sensibilities are different than Northeast sensibilities. So, like, what somebody would the RLHF would be different in a New York City group than, let's say, Kansas. Yeah, that's fascinating. I really never. Yeah, we are into such an interesting and strange, it's amazing to be living at this point in time. It's both exhilarating and frightening at the same time to me.
As it should be, I think, yeah.
It should be. Yeah. Well, you mean if I wasn't frightened, I'd be an idiot. Not that you want it to be frightening, right?
I don't want it to be frightening, but
if you're not frightened, you're not paying attention. Yeah, when we crossed over with the 2 models that came out in early February, where the announcement was made that for the first time ever in a model, the AI program, there was more AI coding in the model than there was human coding. So we're to the point now where AI is coding AI. Like that just clicked something in my head that said, "Ooh, I don't know about that one."
Yeah, I think it's called the hard takeoff, and this is where hard takeoff, where you have recursive self-improvement, right? So if you have recursive self-improvement, then it's going to start to accelerate even faster than it already has been with just humans in the loop. And there's all these predictions about like when will there be no human in the loop in AI training runs, and Elon Musk talks about it, and other ones are like predicting that maybe even by the end of this year. So that's a whole other kind of.
Yeah, but now you get into and then the counter argument to that is model collapse based on synthetic data, right? Like when we get to a point where the AI is creating all the data that it's actually training on, right? Have you seen the data? And I don't remember the exact numbers, but like if you inject 1% bad data in a model, you get like 10% bad prediction, right? Like the ratio of bad data to reliability of the model is extreme. Right. So a lot of people think that if we get to the point where the AI is creating all of the data, as that percentage of bad data gets higher, right, the models become useless very quickly.
Yeah, it's the same thing as like you being an echo chamber, right? Like you have
That's a
people
good
can have model
analogy.
collapse too, right? People can have model collapse of their mind as well if you're like in an echo chamber, just sitting there on 4chan all day or something, or wherever wherever you are.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we have that now, right? I mean, with the far
Yeah,
right and far left. I mean,
yeah. So kind of circling back a little bit into the, I guess, the compliance world. Right now, I think there's AI compliance is, maybe no longer a theoretical need. There's like real deadlines that are happening through like, the EU AI Act.
mhm,
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think the ISO 42001, is that also has AI components?
mhm. Yeah, ISO 42001 is the recipe for an AI management system, AI risk management system. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's I guess, so this is a kind of no longer theoretical. We need to be kind of handling these things. What are the timelines, do you think? How urgent do you think this is for most companies? And what should they do about it?
Um, the urgent, you've probably seen this in your years in security, as have I, is that organizations don't tend to wake up one morning and say, I want to be secure and I want to be certifiably secure. They wake up one morning and their customer says, we can no longer do business with you, or a new customer says, I'm not going to do business with you, or a regulator says, you need this, right? So I think, what you're going to see is how and when are people's feet held to the fire to comply with these laws and regulations and or certification frameworks. So the EU AI Act is one of the more concerning and more conceptually challenging to interpret frameworks out there. With August 2nd, 2026, theoretical, it's out there. Now there's a new omnibus guidance that's a little bit confusing, um, but it doesn't appear to be softening that date, right? And I've got a number of clients that are wanting to ensure that they've got a certified, not a certifiable, but approvable compliance program in place ahead of that deadline. In the U.S., right, we have something called the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. Like most NIST guidance, it is a voluntary guideline, intended to give you a framework that you can implement within your organization. And if you are thinking about building an AI risk management framework, you'd be crazy not to download a copy that it's free, and it's an excellent starting point. Is it perfect? No. It'll get better, right? NIST does a great job with their guidance. Um, the orgs that are really advancing and moving this forward quickest are, of course, doing this because they're trying to make money off of AI. And we talked about that shadow AI, and we talked about that organizations that are buying third-party AI products are going to need to validate, right, that third party is doing things correctly. So they can either do that themselves through questionnaires or audits of their third party providers, which no one likes to do. Everybody likes it when I say, are you secure? And you say, go to my website and go to my trust portal, and you can see all the certifications I hold. And the guy can go, oh, great. He takes the link, he copies it, he pastes it into his third party risk management program. He says, I'm done with my review, right? So the ISO 42001 is, I'm done with my review, right? So you've demonstrated to me that you've got a comprehensive AI governance risk management program that I can look at. I can see all of the controls and principles and objectives that are built into it. And a third party came and audited you and validated you're doing everything. So that's going to be, that's what we're seeing in our SaaS providers right now. So any SaaS providers that are enabling, building AI into their products, that's a common thing that they're doing, especially if they're also ISO 27 already ISO 27001 certified, because the management system, clause 4 through 10, for your cybersecurity program is identical to the one for your AI management system. So it makes it very easy to all of the processes and methodologies that you use to manage your cyber program can be direct. Remember that operationalization we talked about earlier? You can use that same group of processes to manage AI risk at the same time.
Okay. So yeah, it becomes almost like an extension of 27001.
That's well said. It acts as an extension, although it can be done independently as well, of course.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And maybe just to talk about that, 4201, or
42,001.
sorry, 42,001. So I think you mentioned in the past about a client where they had like multiple certifications, where the 42,001 audit was like kind of a mess because the auditors didn't understand AI governance. Can you kind of take us back to that and just maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, like uh, with any framework, when frameworks first come out, right, they're on new topics, and um, there are often not many subject matter experts in that field. Like right now, if you asked me, um, how would you rank your knowledge in AI risk management? I'm better than most, but I am far from an expert, right? You'd be foolish to call yourself an expert in a field which is effectively new and effectively, 50% of what it was a year ago, changed. The half-life in this of information and knowledge in this field changes at the fastest rate of any field that I've ever been in. It's crazy. So what we have is that there are some people that are out there doing these audits that uh, understand the framework, but don't understand necessarily the technology and the nuances of how people are implementing technology. Can't really opine as to whether or not the threat modeling and the results of a threat model are reasonable and appropriate. So you've got a gap, a knowledge gap in some instances on the attestation side. Now, I will tell you, I've been through some ISO 42001 certification audits where the person that was doing the audit was way smarter than me and way smarter than anyone in my client's room, right? So it really is a mixed bag right now. I think if you look forward, 2 or 3 years, the likelihood of that occurring goes down, doesn't disappear. Someone's always doing an audit for the first time. So I think it's a little bit of a learning curve on the auditor's case. What they missed there was, uh, so if you look at an audit, right, there's a design component, right? Does the design of the control achieve the control objective? Then there's the operational component. Did they operate the control in accordance with the definition, right? And then there's an effectiveness. Most audits don't get into the effectiveness. And really what they missed a bit was because they didn't understand some of the elements of the design, they really missed the fact that the operationalization wasn't occurring in the way that it should.
Right. So that kind of takes it back to if the auditor doesn't do that, then you're kind of back to the security theater idea.
Yes. Yeah.
Or compliance theater.
And yeah, you're right. In this particular case, their certification is a little bit of compliance theater, which is a shame.
Yeah, and I think like while that does, especially for startups or smaller companies when they're kind of starting out, maybe that's fine for them at first because they're like, yes, we got it, we can get some revenue, we can get that customer or whatever. But I think like long term that could be obviously not a bad strategy. It's not a strategy. It's just you're just ignoring it, right? So I think what would be your message to, I guess, CISOs kind of going through these, getting their Pokemon checkboxes, and what is the kind of solid advice to kind of getting out of that compliance theater mindset? What do you think is the main blocker for CISOs these days to get out of that?
Usually it's communication upstream, to the management suite, because I hate to say this, but I tend to live in the world of cyber risk, AI risk, privacy risk. There's a business risk world, right? So sometimes ensuring the business risk isn't realized has more net value to the organization than ensuring that the cyber or privacy or AI risk isn't realized, right? Like the impact to the organization is higher. So what happens is, you're sitting there as the CISO, and you're in a new stage startup, you're burning through cash very rapidly. If you don't have this certification by this point in time, we can't win these deals, and our burn rate is so high, we're not going to exist, right? If you're dealing with that CISO, he's getting pressure just to get it no matter what. And arguably, if you're truly supporting that person, you could make the argument that, yeah, a paper tiger, a compliance theater is in the benefit of that organization, right? So that's the problem that you run into, is that, look, we'll be in situations where the guy has just got this pressure. It's like, yeah, I know this isn't, I know, but I'll clean it up. I'll clean it up next year, right? So I would say that's the typical problem that we see. and like you have an empathy for someone like that, and you actually can understand the rationalization of the senior management team. And it's frustrating as a practitioner who wants to do things right and by the book, to be in that challenging situation, right? Now, like implementing it, okay, well, we can only do what we can do. The challenge is if we're going to audit it, right, as the ISO, if we do an ISMS internal audit or an AI risk management audit, unfortunately, like we have to document what we see.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you kind of said something there that kind of reminded me, like, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. It's another one for you, but that's kind of the problem with that. It's like, oh, we'll clean it up later. I mean,
well, that's
sure
what
you will.
Yeah, that's the same thing. Like, I always tell people there's no such thing as a proof of concept, right? Because if a proof of concept is successful, what happens? They turn it on. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, we don't need to bake that in. It's a proof of concept. It's MVP.
But you prove the concept, so ship it, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And now you got a half-assed product that's out there, and you're spending the next couple of years trying to clean stuff up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to be mindful of your time here. I think we're just a few minutes over. Maybe as a final thing, maybe we could kind of try to go fast forward here. If we're looking at 12 months out or even further out, what do you think in this space is going to be objectively different? Like, what should CISOs expect to happen over the next year or two that you think is going to be a big thing to watch out for?
Agentic AI, right? I mean, what we're seeing now is, the Jack Block announcement, the Jack Dorsey announcement, excuse me, I think was one of those moments where I just shook my head and said, oh, crap, right? I think it was misleading. He's not laying off 40% of the workforce because of truly just AI, right? He's consolidating two products into one, right? It was Stripe and Square, right? I think of the name of the two products, right? Stripe, Square, and Block, I think it is. And then you've seen organizations like Amazon announces a layoff because of AI, and they're rewarded in the stock market. So what is that message to boards? What is that message to CXO suite? Is, we got to move fast. We got to do the same thing. So like I'm constantly on phone calls where people saying like, we need to figure out how to use AI, and there's this mad race, is like much the same there was the cloud and other things, but it's even accelerated more beyond that. And really to get to a point where you are maximizing the benefit of AI, you're getting into agentic AI where there's a level of autonomy, and it's stringing together different processes into a workflow that creates efficiencies of scale. So I think what we're going to see over the next year to 18 months, 2 years, is this is going to be the era of agentic really moving into place. And to the point that you talked about earlier, and I couldn't agree with you more. These agentic systems, we move the risk from things like hallucination and data leakage to business decisions are being made in an autonomous fashion at scale, often without a human in the loop. And I think that, like as a CISO right now, that would be the thing that would scare the bejesus out of me.
And any words of advice to handle that, or still too early?
I would say I'd retire.
All right. Well, you heard it here, folks.
I think it's unavoidable. It's going to sound like a painfully aware comment, but you're going to need some form of AI governance program to be able to understand and communicate this risk if you're going to have any chance of properly controlling.
All right. I think that's good advice. Again, thank you for your time. I'm going to be going forward a little bit over. It was a great conversation with you. And thank you so much.
Thanks, man. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.